Hey everyone, you hear the word sustainability thrown around all the time, right? But have you ever wondered how big companies actually do it? How do they turn that buzzword into real action? Well, it's not just about good intentions. It's about having a real plan with real data and real accountability. Today, we are diving deep into the frameworks that businesses use to measure and manage their impact on the world. Let's get into it. To really get why this is such a big deal, let's just start with a number. $30 trillion. That's how much money is currently being invested around the world using what are called environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, criteria. This isn't some niche, feel-good trend anymore. It's a massive financial force that's changing the rules for how businesses have to operate. But this idea didn't just pop up overnight. You can trace its roots all the way back to the 1970s, with movements to pull investments from companies involved with apartheid in South Africa. Then, in the 90s, this idea of the triple bottom line came along, arguing that, hey, maybe we should measure companies on more than just profit. People and planet matter too. The term ESG finally got its big break in 2004. And then in 2015, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals pretty much set the global agenda. So, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with what ESG really is. Then we'll look at the rulebook companies use to report on it, how they set goals for the future, check out some real-world examples, and wrap up with what's next for corporate accountability. All right, first things first, let's break down this ESG acronym that you hear everywhere. What is it, and why should you even care? At its heart, ESG is basically a new way of looking at a company. Think of it like a report card that goes way beyond just the financials. Instead of only asking, is this company making money? ESG asks, how is this company impacting the environment? How is it treating people? And is it run in a fair and transparent way? It's a much bigger picture of a company's health. So it breaks down into three main pillars. The E is for environmental. This is all about the planet, things like carbon emissions, water usage, and how much trash a company produces. S is for social. This covers how a company treats people, its employees, its customers, and the communities it works in. And G is for governance. This is the behind-the-scenes stuff, how the company is actually run. Is it ethical? Is it transparent? Is it fighting corruption? Okay, so having these categories is great, but how do you actually measure this stuff? How do you compare what one company is doing to another without it being a total mess? Well, that's where the rulebooks come in. The most popular rulebook by far comes from the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. The best way to think about GRI is as a universal language for sustainability. It sets out the rules so that a report from a company in one country can be fairly compared to a report from a company halfway across the world. It's the closest thing we have to a standardized corporate report card for this stuff. Now, a really central idea within GRI is something called due diligence. And no, this isn't just a legal term for covering your bases. In this world, it means a company has to be proactive. It has to constantly be looking for where it might be causing harm, actively trying to prevent that harm, and then being totally open about how it's dealing with it all. The process is actually pretty logical. First, you identify where you might be causing a problem. Then, you do everything you can to prevent it from happening in the first place. If you can't totally prevent it, you mitigate it. You lessen the damage as much as possible. And finally, you have to account for it. You have to tell everyone what happened and what you're doing about it. It's a constant cycle. And this is what it actually looks like: a GRI content index. It looks like a simple table, but this thing is a powerhouse for transparency. It's basically a roadmap that tells anyone, investors, customers, you name it, exactly where to find the data on every single topic. No more hiding the bad news in the fine print. So, reporting on what you've done is one thing. It's crucial. But what about the future? How does a company set a goal to do better that's actually credible, and not just some nice-sounding PR promise? And that is exactly where the Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTi, comes in. If you think of GRI as the report card on past performance, think of SBTi as the fitness plan for the future. It doesn't let companies just pick a random number for reducing emissions. No way. It makes sure their goals are actually in line with what climate science says is needed to meet the Paris Agreement. Now, it's really important to get how these two work together. They're not competing, they're on the same team. GRI is the broad framework for reporting on everything, E, S, and G from the past and present. SBTi is laser-focused on one thing, setting ambitious, science-backed climate goals for the future. You need both. And getting a target approved by SBTi is tough. A company has to account for emissions from its own operations. That's scope 1 and 2. But here's the kicker.
If a big chunk of their emissions comes from their supply chain or their products being used, that's scope 3, they have to set a target for that too. And these aren't some vague by 2050 promises. They have to be for the next 5 to 15 years. It's serious stuff.
Okay, so that's a lot of theory. But what does all this actually look like when real companies put it into practice? Let's look at a few examples. Let's start with IKEA. They have something called iWay, which is basically their ESG rulebook for every single one of their suppliers. They use their massive size to say, if you want to do business with us, you have to meet our standards on worker rights, on water use, on waste, on everything. It's a powerful way to drive change way beyond their own four walls. Or how about UPS? Their biggest environmental problem is obvious, right? All those trucks burning fuel. So they built this incredibly smart software called Orion. Think of it as a superpowered GPS that calculates the most efficient route for every driver every single day. It saves them millions of miles and cuts a huge amount of emissions. And in the world of fashion, which has a massive waste problem, H&M is trying to tackle it with their Close the Loop program. They let you bring in old clothes, any brand, in any condition, and they'll make sure they get reused or recycled. It's an attempt to move away from that take, make, throwaway model and toward a circular one. So these examples are great, and they show real progress is possible. But, and this is a big but, this whole world of sustainability frameworks is far from perfect. It's facing some pretty serious heat. The number one criticism is greenwashing. You've heard of it. It's when a company spends more time and money marketing itself as green than actually doing the hard work. Another huge problem is that there's no single standard way to rate companies, which leads to a lot of confusion. Plus, a lot of the data can be fuzzy and hard to verify, and the regulations are changing all the time. It's a bit of a Wild West out there. So what's the solution? Well, the whole system is moving from voluntary to mandatory. Governments and regulators are stepping in and saying, okay, this isn't optional anymore. They're creating standardized rules to make sustainability reporting just as rigorous and reliable as financial reporting. The goal is to get a clear, honest picture of what's really going on. And that brings us to the final critical question. We have all these frameworks, we have trillions of dollars in play, and there's a huge push for accountability. But is it just a lot of fanfare? Or is this change happening fast enough to actually meet the massive global challenges, like climate change, that are staring us right in the face? That